After the attacks on the World Trade Centers in 2001, the United States has been on high alert when it comes to a terrorist threat or information about terrorist parties. This information is critical and can save many lives, but how does one go about extracting it? A common form of interrogation is classic interrogation, which is an intense interview between the suspect and the official. This method of questioning can be effective, but what if the suspected terrorist won't talk? What happens then? Officials often turn to methods of torture to extract the critical information. Statistically, it is true that most of the time the suspect will give out information during a session of torture. However, it is also true that most of the information recovered from torturing is false. The suspect will say anything to stop the pain, even a false confession. Research has shown that torture can have enduring negative effects on both survivors and perpetrators, and is ineffective for obtaining reliable information in the interrogation. This lack of unreliable evidence makes it nearly impossible to hold a fair court case against the suspect in question, as an interrogator will never know for sure if the suspected terrorist is telling the truth. In a study done by the Universal Definition of Torture and Cruel Treatment, they say that torture is inhuman.
Despite the evidence being displayed in the cases against suspects are essentially unreliable and make it impossible to prosecute the suspect successfully, they often get convicted. This action demonstrates an unfair trial. In a fair trial, the unreliable evidence will be disregarded, unlike in the terrorist cases. There are also violations of other basic criminal rights in the United States when it comes to torturing terrorists. One violation being the right to remain silent while being questioned and treating the suspect with violence. According to an article by Charles Scaliger, the United States Constitution protects criminals against self-incrimination as well against cruel and unusual punishment, which by implication references torture. Domestic incidents of torture are covered by state criminal statutes. A person guilty of committing torture faces up to 20 years in prison, or even execution, if the torture in question resulted in a victim's death. But if terrorists are treated like criminals, shouldn't they receive the same rights as criminals in the United States? This is only one of the ways the suspect is mistreated, as many perpetrators of torture dehumanize the suspect in order to perform morbid acts like waterboarding on them. For example, according to CGU, there's a picture of soldiers in Iraq in front of torture victims smiling, appearing to take sadistic pleasure in the abuse. In responding to the outcry created by the photos, soldiers explained that they had been instructed to soften up prisoners for more systematic interrogation. Essentially, these suspected terrorists are treated as tools that need to be used to achieve the goals of the torturer.
Not only does it take a toll on the torture victims, but it also damages the humanity of the perpetrators. Since they dehumanize the victims, the perpetrators are likely to become brutalized because of their acts. It is proven that most perpetrators need intense therapy after engaging in a torture session because each act of torture performed makes it easier for them to validate the use for torture in the future. Torture takes a toll on the victims, perpetrators, and the institution that enforces its use. It severely damages the reputation and integrity of the institution. According to BBC, torture produces internal dissent and corrupts and degrades the state of the institution. The controversial topic of terrorism is further discussed in the cover story called American Justice by Charles Scaliger. The article states that torture is not only the very personification of tyranny, but also ineffective and immoral. The terrorists that were involved with the 9/11 attack committed a terrible act. However, they are still human beings and children of God. Since they are children of God, they are entitled to be treated as such by a nation that professes Christian heritage. By choosing to ignore the natural rights of every being, the United States would be committing tyranny and discrimination, thus ruining the reputation of the honorable nation.